King Tut. Right.
Hello everybody, this is King Tut here, and welcome to your 26 C++ tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be teaching you guys vectors. So before I continue this tutorial, I would like to clarify that so either this video or the next video will be my last video for the series before just going into video games. I'm still going to do series still going to continue with the C++ series, but it's going to be, you have all the essentials to make different wide varieties of applications such as video games. And I'm going to be making a new series called Game Dev with C++. So what's a container? So before we go into vector, a vector is part of a container. We need to know what a container is so that we could understand other objects like vector. So a container stores a collection of objects that was implemented as class templates. So what does that even mean? So it's basically a collection of different objects. So there are different types of containers. There are sequence container, adapter container, associative container, and unordered container. So these are different kinds of variables that works in a very weird, very unique way. So vector here is part of that. It's one of the the variable, the special data type, but it's not really a data type because you implement the data type into a container. It's one of those object variable that you could make it as a variable. I'll show you what I mean in the next slide. So a vector is similar to an array, but the array size can be adjusted. So that's basically what vector is. So vectors, what makes vector a container is its own feature to be just like an array, but allow you to resize its array size. Because the array is when you're implementing the size, the amount of index you have, the amount of values that you want to put into the array, it's constant. It's not dynamic or adjustable like vectors. And vectors are part of the STL library, which stands for the Standard Template Library, which every objects, every feature and functionality in that library are based off of templates. And later on in the series, I'm going to be teaching you guys templates. I personally not a master of template. I even don't know how to use template, so that's going to be a learning experience for me as well as for you. So how do you declare vectors? So you implement the vector library. So you type in the include statement and you put in vector inside that angular bracket, and you make sure that using namespace std is implemented. Otherwise, you have to put std, and then you put 2 colons, and then you put vector. And it's going to be the same thing for cout and line. So you need to have using namespace std, so that way you don't have to write it out and make your life more miserable. And it has to be implemented before it's made, which that's usually what we do. And in the main function, you type in the vector keyword, and then inside the angular brackets, you put in the data type. So int, double, string, char, float, so on and so forth. And then you put in the name of the vector you want to give it to. So vector, and then inside the angular braces, string, and then a name. Let's just say employee name, for example. Or actually, let's do enemies. So that way you have some taste of game development. How do you assign vectors? So there are many ways, but I typically do put in the vector name, dot, pushback, and then inside the parentheses, you put in the values. And inside that value, you can put whatever value based off of the data type. So that's the spiel about vector. Let me show you how to do it. Let me show you by hand. All right. So like we talked about, you need to include vector and make sure there's no errors, because when you're putting in library, it's case sensitive. And then I made sure using namespace std does exist before main, because if you're gonna put it after main, the computer will not recognize, since it reads from top to bottom, and once it goes to main and you output whatever you wanted to output, or it's not gonna recognize it. It's gonna think that cout is just a made-up variable that you didn't declare. Alright, so to implement vectors, like we talked about, vector. So let's make sure it's alright. Usually Cevelop kind of lags. So let's do string. And let's do enemies. And just end it with a semicolon. Then enemies dot, actually, let's save it. And then actually, I don't need to build it, since Cevelop recognized that this is legit and there's no errors. So let's put in enemies, pushback, and then you put in whatever value you want to put in for enemies. So let's just think of enemies in different games. Let's do Chrono Trigger, for example. Lavos. I love Chrono Trigger. And we could rinse and repeat with the assignment a lot of times. So enemies, pushback, Queen Zeal. Pushback. Nope. Aussie. And that's that. That's all you need to do. But what if you want to output this? You want to output the whole vector. Well, you could either do a for loop, and then int I equals 0, starting with 0, I less than, and here's a very useful way to do it. Instead of guessing the amount of the array size of the vector, you could just put enemies.size, and this stores in the array size of the vector, of vector string enemies. So you don't have to worry, you don't have to guess how many values did you put into the vector variable. And let's increment it by 1. And then let's just see out enemies I and line. And then you can run this program. And voila, it lists out all the enemies' name as we expected. So it listed out Lavos, Queen Zeal, and Ozzy. There's another way, and it's called a for each. So for enemies, or actually int I, then put a colon on it, enemies. And then you put cout x and line. Actually, no, that gives me an error because I assigned it to I. So if you're gonna output in the for each loop, you don't put enemies on it. You put in the variable that you assign it to. Let's run this program. And see, we get an error. You might be wondering why. And that's because, from what I realize here, this data type must match with this. So it needs to be a vector inside the parentheses string. This is why you're outputting I instead of enemies, because you're declaring a variable that matches with this. It matches with this variable. So you want to make life easier, you put auto. And in auto, it guesses which data type and container you're using. And I'm actually using a vector string. So a vector with data type string. So let's save, and hopefully all the errors are resolved. And it actually did. So when in doubt, put auto. If you would like me to write it all out, actually, if you hover your mouse on it, it's going to tell you string. So you can just put string on it here. And then it's another way of matching this to this. All right. So there you go. I showed you how to declare and assign vectors, and showed you how to output vectors. There are many features and functionalities in vector, and I can't really go through all of it. So make use of the resource that I showed you in another video. So it's CPP reference or C++.com. These are really two good reference, and if you want to know more about vector, go to these resources. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. If you really like my video, please give it a big thumbs up. If you're on YouTube, BitChute, or BitTube, please subscribe to my channel. If you're on Vlare, please follow my channel. If you're on Library, please follow my channel and download my video. And I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Bye!